Mass Effect 3 is getting closer and closer to being released, and one of the biggest debates that's been going on amongst the fans of Mass Effect are the RPG elements. The BioWare has stated that they've added more RPG elements, and many people are arguing as to whether they have or haven't. What is RPG elements? What makes a game an RPG?
How is this an RPG anyway?
And this debate's been raging since Mass Effect 2 came out. There are so many people that talk about how Mass Effect 2 is not an RPG because they took away this and that and that and this. And other people on the other side say it is an RPG because of this, this, and this. And it is a fierce debate. And I thought I'd make a video to try and clarify at least my side of the argument and offer a point of view. And I say my side of the argument to be completely fair and completely honest. This is my opinion. It's not necessarily any more valid than anyone else's opinion. I am simply trying to offer a well presented perspective on what RPG games are or should be. Now, there are lots of people whose opinions are set and they will not change. This may not be for you. You're welcome to watch it and argue against it, by all means. But this is more to just present my arguments better, because I'm not great with text. So now that we got that out of the way, now that everyone understands that it's my opinion and not fact, let's get started. One of the biggest things that I see is Mass Effect 2 is not a role-playing game because they took away the inventory and they took away stats and they made it a straight shooter game, and you know, you shoot the same no matter what level you are. Your aim doesn't get any better. It's all twitch-based mechanics, whereas in Mass Effect 1 you had huge inventory screens and you had statistics to say how well you shot. And things like that. And while that's partially true and partially not true, the question is, does this have anything to do with RPG? What makes an RPG game? Now, it is incredibly hard to define RPG, and I know this argument's used again and again. You cannot define what an RPG is because it's so broadly used. And in some sense, yes, that is true. There is no dictionary term for role-playing game. However, it's in the name. Role-playing game. The term role-playing game was devised back on pen and paper games like Dungeons and Dragons. Not from Dungeons and Dragons, but games like that, where your job was to take the role of a character that you created and play as that character. Pretend you are that character. Fill that character's shoes with your motivations, your ethics, your everything, your personality, or another personality if you so choose, but you controlled everything about that character. Were they good? Were they evil? How would they react in a situation? Would they rush right into a fight or try and avoid it at any cost, or maybe talk their way out of the situation? Were they charming and elegant, or brutish and intimidating? That was your job, was to try and inject all of this personality into your character. That was why it was called a role-playing game, because you took that character and you made it your own. Now, in order for the game to work, they use certain mechanics like dice and stats and leveling in order to make it a fun game and to make it work, and to place limiters, because you can't, unless you have very dedicated people, you can't have a role-playing game without placing limits on people. Why? Because they would role-play themselves as gods. If you didn't have any sort of limiter, you would be like, well, I point my finger at that man and he spontaneously combusts from his kidneys. So you have to have some sort of rule set here, and that's why they came up with stats. Well, you can't do that because your magic's only a 3. Well, you cannot lift up that house and throw it at that baby lamb as much as you say you want to, because you only have a strength of 6. You're just going to have to chunk a rock at it instead. That's why the stats were there, to help make the game fair and balanced and more fun. But the stats and inventories and lists themselves were not why it was called a role-playing game. Those were the means to an end. It was called a role-playing game because you played the role of your character, like a play. An actor fills the roles of the character, and while the actor has certain lines that he must speak and certain actions that he must do, and has less freedom than, say, a roleplay character is, that actor still injects his own personality, vision, and idea of what that character is into their performance, just like you do in a role-playing game. That's what a role-playing game is. To prove my point that stats and inventory are not what make a role-playing game, when I was in basic training, I joined the Army. I had the great honor of joining the Army 3 months before September 11th, which means I went to basic training right afterwards when it was chock full of people, and I had to sit there for a month doing absolutely nothing, just waiting to get trained. One of the guys in my barracks actually made a role-playing game, an Aliens vs. Predators role-playing game, with nothing. We had no dice, we had no nothing. We were in a military barracks, but he developed a very fun role-playing game with no stats. It had like a leveling system, but it had no real inventory. It definitely didn't have a dice system. We had a roll of toilet paper and a trash can, and you would try and make that trash can. And if you made the shot, you hit your enemy. The harder the shot, the further away from the trash can you were. And that's how you decided how well your character did. That's not a dice system. That's not a stat system. But it worked perfectly. Because it was just the means to an end to be able to roleplay your character. Now, what does this mean? This means that if you take the word at its face value and what it was originally intended to mean, Mass Effect, you could take away every single stat, turn it into a complete first-person shooter, and it could still theoretically be an RPG, because it has nothing to do with inventory and dice rolls. Now, what the argument is people say, yes, but that's what it's commonly associated with. Why? Why is it commonly associated? Well, what happened was, when people started trying to put role-playing games into computer games and console games, they took the stat system with the RPG, because that's what it became associated with. If you said, like, Dungeons & Dragons was a role-playing game, but when you think Dungeons & Dragons, you think a stat system, a dice system, because those were the rules they used to make the game work. So when video games were made, they also adopted this stat system because it works so well with the computer. And because they adopted that stat system that was associated with role-playing games, people also started to associate those video games with role-playing games, even if they had nothing to do with role-playing. And thus, the broad term of RPG was created. Let me give you a perfect example. Most JRPGs, Japanese role-playing games, are not role-playing games at all. It's my opinion, and I know there's about 8 snipers outside trying to shoot me right now, but they're not. They really aren't. A role-playing game where you fill the shoes of the character, you play the role of a character, is not what most Japanese RPGs are about. Take Final Fantasy X, for example. Don't get me wrong, I love that game, which I'm probably having more people shoot me for. I'm finding out very recently that people think that game sucked. Hey, welcome to your opinion. It's probably even valid. I'm not saying that Final Fantasy X was the most well-constructed story ever. I just have childhood love for it. But it's not a role-playing game at all. Why? Because you play the role of Tidus, and Tidus, you have no control over his character, personality, or actions, other than to fight and level him up. That's it. No matter how many times you play Final Fantasy X, Tidus always develops as a character in the same way. He laughs at the same scenarios. He cries at the same scenarios. He says the same thing every single time. You take him on a journey, yes, and you watch him grow from a spoiled child to a real hero, but he never grows any differently. You have no control over the aspect of his character growth. Therefore, it's not roleplay. You're not playing a role of anything. You're controlling an avatar in an interactive movie. A very fun interactive movie. But there's no sense of roleplay whatsoever. The only thing that you have control over is his inventory, his equipment, his stats, and how he develops his combat abilities. That's about it. Where's the roleplay in that? Where do you get to decide how Tidus reacts to a situation, or how he feels about Yuna dying or possibly dying? Because in a role-playing game, you would be able to control how your character reacted or felt about a certain situation. Therefore, Final Fantasy X, as great a game as it is not a role-playing game. It is called a role-playing game because it uses the same stat system that many people associate with RPGs. Now, on the other hand, look at a game like Baldur's Gate, the computer BioWare Baldur's Gate saga. You have a hero that you play, that you create. You create the character. You create what class they are, if it's a guy or a girl, what their name is. The only thing you don't really have control over is their background. But you choose how they react to certain situations. Are they good? Are they evil? If someone mentions your father, Gorion, do you love your father, or did you think he was a fool? You have the choice to choose that. Do you want to fall in love? Can you fall in love? Do you choose this person or that person? Which person does your character like more? Does your character enjoy the idea that they are the spawn of Baal? Does your character not? Does your character want power for the sake of power, or do they just want to be left alone? You get to control all of these things to a limited degree because it is a video game. But where do you have that in Final Fantasy X? You don't. You don't get to make Tidus, he's already made. You don't get to choose his personality, it's already chosen. You don't get to choose if he falls in love or not, he does. Every single time, the exact same way. So it's not a role-playing game at all, it's just called that because of its stat system. Now, if you take away the stat system from Final Fantasy X and from Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 2 would still have role play in it. Final Fantasy X, not so much. So, if you take these two examples and then you apply it to Mass Effect, I don't understand where the argument is coming from. A lot of you guys say that Mass Effect 2 was not a role-play game, it was a first-person shooter, because A, they took away the inventory, your ability to have a lot of guns and a lot of modifications to put on your guns and to switch out at will, and you found loot on crates and in items and that kind of thing. They took that away. B, they made it all Twitch-based mechanics. In other words, there are no longer many stats controlling how well you shot your gun. In Mass Effect 1, if you had no skill levels in, say, assault rifle, and you tried to shoot your assault rifle, you would spray it everywhere except where you wanted it to go. Not really. But it would be, you were much more effective with an assault rifle when you leveled it up. It was much tighter, you could shoot for longer, you had better powers. In Mass Effect 2, no matter if you're level 1 or level 30, your aim with the assault rifle is the same. The characteristics of the assault rifle are the same. C, there was no exploration. Not really, not like there was in Mass Effect 1. The levels were smaller. You couldn't explore the Citadel like you could in Mass Effect 1. You couldn't land on planets and go explore it and find minerals and stuff in the Mako like you could in Mass Effect 1. You just didn't have those options. It was much more linear level designs. And I'm trying to think if I'm missing something. Those are the three that I remember. Hang on a second.